Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Welcome again to this segment of the Oregon Voters Digest. I'm Bruce Broussard, your host. And by George, welcome. Boy, I tell you, we're really getting into some exciting time in politics here in the Pacific Northwest. And in fact, it's not just the Pacific Northwest now, we're all over these United States and all over the globe for that matter. I mean, really, we are really out there and we are part and parcel campaigns from every parts of this world, if you will. So one day, anyway, you'll get a better feel of it as we go along as to what my reasoning, if you will, for sharing it that way. But what we're going to do today is that naturally we've just gotten out of one situation. That was the city. We had a runoff between Loretta and Dan Ryan, and the ultimate result was Dan Ryan. It's my understanding there's more to talk to that because Loretta Smith is going to challenge the outcome of that piece. We'll have more to say about that. We might say something about that in the next segment after we take a break. But on the other hand, we will talk about that part. But now what we need to do is that we've got to move on. We've got a major race here within the city of Portland, and that is the runoff between for the mayor's seat with Sharon, with Sarah. I'm gonna get that name. It's almost like Broussard. People call me Buzzard, but it's Broussard.
Last name is 2020.
There you go. Sarah
2020.
Sarah 2020. Okay. I got you. But anyway, Sarah Enron, very, very interesting woman. I mean, she's very, very interesting and right up front with it. She's very enthusiastic about running, but for some strange reason, the media hasn't caught on yet. They're not giving, as far as I'm concerned, giving her equal time. And it's very, very important that she's given some equal time at this point in time, because like I said before, we are on the spotlight from a national perspective. We're kind of like recognized from the standpoint we're infested with terrorism and all kinds of weird stuff, if you will, throughout the country. And I noticed today that the president-elect now, President Trump, has been using Portland as Portland in his vocabulary every time he speaks about anything and everything. As far as the unrest and this, that, and the other, we're at the top of the list. I don't think we are, but the fact of the matter is, it's there, and we've got to do something about it. So I thought maybe, now we're getting right at the heat of the matter. We've got to make sure we give her equal time. We got to give her some equal time, and we've got to talk about this issue. I mean, I realize we got a presidential election, but our interest, in all due respect, is Portland now, definitely Portland. We said that initially, but now definitely we've got to talk about Portland, Oregon, if you will, the living room of the state of Oregon. And boy, my God, we're having some problems. And as you all know, if you don't know, if you're watching this program, the protesting is the major concern, the evening protesting piece aspect of it. So with that, what we're going to do to kickstart this thing, we happen to find a young man that I indicated some time ago. I missed him when I was a Marine recruiter. I missed him. Boy, I tell you, if it given me one more week, I would have got him. He's finally told me that Mom took him off the street for a while that I passed by. But anyway, I'm talking about Greg McKelvey, and Greg has been around for quite some time, and you might not know him, but on his dad, we had two names, but the fact of the matter is, his dad is just as active in all kinds of political things and community things. But the fact of the matter is that Greg is kind of like a chip off the block, for that matter, and so. We got him. We got him here today. He's very active in politics. He happened to be working on another campaign right now. He's working on a campaign. I think when I first saw him, I said, "Well, gee whiz, what are you running for?" He says, "No, I'm just part of the community's effort to get us involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And all of a sudden, to my surprise, he's now the campaign manager for Sarah Enron, basically the young woman that's running against Ted Wheeler aspect of it. Anyway, I happened to get him, and so I said, well, look here, gave him a call and said, look here, we got one issue that the president is constantly throwing on the field, and he's constantly saying that Antifa, i.e. the rioter, the bum runner, I mean anything and everything. And so I said, well, look here, we've got to do something about defining Antifa from a Portland perspective, a Portland, Oregon perspective. And I knew that Greg had, when I even heard the first word about Antifa and whatever, I thought of, I'd heard about it, and I saw Greg, and he was downtown dealing with some of the young people from Portland states and elsewhere, and community, and just talking about, well, basically talking about protesting about whatever issues and whatever. I thought that was interesting. In fact, I even reached out at it, and I picked up on Joey Gibson. A Patriot Prayer, and then I ended up with a Navy guy, Walt. Let me see, was it Walter Walsh? And he's Antifa in his own right, but he's an old Antifa, which is interesting. Former Navy guy, and he and I would have all kinds of battles. But like I said, that was there, and that's how I was able to get in touch with Gregory. And so this time around, I reached out again to Gregory, and naturally the other person that I wanted to reach out to. I wanted to reach out to both mayoral candidates running for office, both Ted Wheeler, who's the sitting mayor, and then also Sarah. And unfortunately, Ted has not, I reached out to him on a number of occasions and through his own folks and whatever, and he never responded. On the other hand, I reached out to Sarah, and she's willing, she's anxious to come aboard and share her thoughts and this, that, and the other. And I think that's good and that's fair. Plus the fact, Portland needs to see her side, because we've got two people running, and it's very, very important that we see what's on our mind, because we've got something we need to deal with right now, today. We got to solve this problem as far as protesting downtown Portland and giving us the kind of image that we don't want in this country, in this state. This is a city of roses, probably one of the most beautiful places. But boy, I tell you, when you drive downtown today, it doesn't look that way. Trust me. So with that, I've said enough. Greg, I'm going to bring you on board, and right up front with you, sir. We just want you to come on and share your thoughts. Hopefully give a little time on and identifying yourself and who you are and where you've lived for a few days and how you were able to miss me coming by to recruit you. But we'll talk about that a bit. And I know you got a young baby there now. I want you to make sure you mention the child. I want you to make sure you mention her. And then I want you to just define Antifa for us, the viewing audience and us. And let us know what that's all about and why you joined it, why you put that together, and where do you think it is today, and any comments you may want to make in regards to Antifa's involvement with downtown, wherever. So whatever's on your mind, we want you to share this. And then after we get through listening to what you have to say on this first half, we're going to take a short break, and you can join us, and then you can join with the rest of the group. We got some folks tonight that are sitting in, and they'll be kind of like the group. We're just going to have a little discussion. And if they want to make some comments or ask you a question or whatever, we can do that in the second half, if you will. And then we'll talk about some of the other local issues, whatever's on your mind. Because like I said, you are there. You're in a campaign. And you may share with us about what do you think are the concerns, the kinds of people you're meeting, knocking on doors and meeting folks and this, that, and the other, to give us an opportunity to share with the viewing audience what our issues are, so these folks can intelligently vote for the right person to sit in that seat. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce you. Greg, there we go.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me, Bruce. It's always a pleasure to be speaking with you. And this isn't my first time coming on your show, so thank you again for having me back. I must have made some sort of impression because you allowed me to come back, albeit it was a couple years ago, so maybe a little bit of a recovery time there. But my name is Gregory McKelvey. I'm from Portland, Oregon, born, raised, and bred. And I went to Oregon State University for political science, and then I went to Lewis and Clark Law School. I went to law school because when I got, after my schooling in political science, people said there's nothing you can do with a political science degree other than go to law school. That ended up being false because I've worked in politics ever since I left Oregon State University, including while I was at Oregon State University. But it's still nice to be able to say that I did attend in law school. After law school and through my studies in political science, I started working on campaigns. And right around that same time was when we saw the first Black Lives Matter uprising following the death of Michael Brown, and then the non-indictment of his murderer, Darren Wilson. And while that was going on, I was running campaigns, and I thought, there's a lot of similarities in what people are talking about in activism and in politics. Yet the two don't work well together, right? The activists are always yelling at the mayor and yelling at candidates, and the mayor and activists and politicians are always thinking that activists are unfair to them, etc. And I thought this doesn't really make sense, given that many of the solutions are the same, many of the problems that they've identified as the same. So I really view my life's work as fusing electoral politics and activism. And I think that the more that we do that, the more that we're going to see more synthesis between the two, and more unity we will see in our city that will result in us not having destructive protests on the street. So since law school, I moved to Atlanta for a year, came back. I now have 2 children. My son Stokely is a little over 2, and then my daughter Sojourner, or Journey, is almost 1 year old. So growing a family and also growing a campaign where I'm working to elect Sarah Anarone for the mayor of Portland. When we talk about Antifa and the protests, I think that many people go into this discussion in a way that is like, how do we solve the protests, or how do we come to a solution with the protests? And I think that many people believe that the mayor should do that by cracking down upon the protesters, by arresting people who are involved in protests where there are illegal activity, etc. But I really think the way that we're actually going to see unity in our city is if we address the reasons why people are mad and people are protesting. So even at the most destructive protests, the ones that I think all of us are willing to condemn violence. I mean, that's the starting point at all times. I want to condemn violence from the police bureau against peaceful protesters, and I want to condemn violence from protesters against property or people. But when we start equating vandalism or property violence to the deaths of Quanice Hayes or George Floyd, that's where you lose me. I'm not going to ever get in a discussion in which we are equating vandalism to death. But like, as we've seen, there's been videos where there's been assaults at protests that could result in grave bodily harm and death, and I would condemn that violence. But I think most people would agree that the vast majority of people at protests are not engaging in that level of illegal behavior, even once they are declared a riot. And so there is no other crime in our society that we police this way, where if you are in proximity to someone who has committed a crime, then thus you are inflicted with brutality as if it was you who did that crime. So if I'm at a protest expressing my First Amendment rights, and I am upset over the death and oppression of Black people, and somebody next to me throws a rock, or somebody next to me spray paints something, that is not a crime that I've committed. So it doesn't make sense that I would have to be tear gassed. And we can't, we have this cancel culture in our society, but police are part of it too, where they are canceling an entire protest because of the actions of certain individuals. And we're behaving as though those actions are not illegal. Those actions are illegal. Assaults, vandalism, graffiti, property damage, arson, those are all crimes. And so if those are crimes, those people should be responsible for those crimes. Not everybody in the entire crowd. And when we see things like tear gas is by nature indiscriminate. Like, when I deploy tear gas on a crowd, the gas doesn't come out of the canister and say, okay, who did the vandalism and who did the assault? The gas is impacting everybody, men, women, children, and dogs. And there's no other crime that we police that way. Think about if there was a murder in your neighborhood, and so police just tear gassed your entire neighborhood, including you and your home. That's not the way we police any crime. but for some reason we have decided that that's how we want to police crime at protests. And what that results in is tomorrow's protest is not just a protest over the deaths that we are seeing at the hands of the police, but also a protest of the previous night's actions by the police. And when we get into that cycle, the protests are never going to end. But if the goal is for protests to end, which I think it should be, but people have different reasons, right? Some people want the protests to end because they don't want property destruction, or they don't want the disruption to our city occurring downtown. Some people who are protesters don't want to have to protest, because if there was nothing to protest, they would be happy, right? If there was not deaths at the hand of the police, if there was not institutional oppression, if there was not institutional racism, they wouldn't have to protest. So everybody's goal is to not have to protest. But in the meantime, when we decide the way to end those protests is to just crack down upon them, not only are we then spurring further protests, but we're not addressing the root causes of why people are angry. And so the solution to protests is to end oppression, and to take those people seriously, and to stand with your community. So if I was the mayor of Portland, or if Sarah was the mayor of Portland right now, she would have been out with the protesters for day one, because one, it is far less likely that somebody is going to throw a rock at an officer if they're standing next to the mayor. And it is far less likely for the police officers to bombard and bull rush and hurt a crowd if they know that the mayor is in that crowd. And to listen to their demands. And the problem that we have now with our city politicians, not just the mayor, and not just our city politicians, but politicians in general, is they are unwilling to go into a meeting and say, I am here, I am hearing you, and you are here. I'm not moving from this. I can hear that you're not moving from this, but where can we find some middle ground? And what we have now is a mayor who goes to any meeting and only wants to talk about what they agree upon, but is unwilling to say, look, I have this position and I'm not moving from it. Like, the mayor is unwilling to go into a meeting and say, I'm not defunding the police. I'm not abolishing the police tomorrow, but I don't want police to be beating you up. So let's talk about that. I'm not going to move from this. If that means that you don't want to talk to me anymore, then so be it. But I'm not moving from there. And we have politicians that are too cowardly to say where they stand, where they're unwilling to move from, and thus we're not able to have a discussion on how to move our city forward.
Oh, gee, was that it? No, it couldn't have been. Could have been that. Could have been that. Well, in all due respect, I really appreciate that. And then let's go. You're sort of like introducing Sarah to us. I know we're going to be interviewing her next week, but can you share a little bit more about an introduction to her, about her for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sarah Anna Roan, she's running for Portland mayor against Ted Wheeler. She ran in 2016, and she didn't run necessarily to win, but she ran because we were having a conversation for mayor that was between Jules Bailey and Ted Wheeler, and she felt like neither of them were talking about the issues that people like her, that her neighbors, that communities, frontline communities and communities that are hurting needed to hear about. And to be involved in that discussion. So she ran to try and get these issues, especially things like climate justice, and making sure that our environment is going to be livable for people like my kids and for my generation as we go forward. And also, and how we were going to solve the most pressing issues that we have. So in that campaign in 2016, Ted Wheeler ran on police reform. He ran on addressing our homelessness crisis. He ran on ending traffic in our city, and none of those things have been solved. And so when 2020 came, she said, look, all of the things I was talking about, I feel like I've been vindicated on and was right. Ted Wheeler has failed to address any of the things that we have, all of these broken promises about all of the issues that people care about. And so we ran again. And part of what's beautiful about her election is that she's running as a publicly financed candidate. So historically, candidates were not able to say exactly what they want to say. because they knew that they had to get their funding from incredibly wealthy individuals. And so if I know that the only way for me to have enough money to win my election is to say things that the Portland Business Alliance or the Portland Police Association or developers and such and realtors and landlords are going to be very happy with, then I'm unwilling to even take bolder stances that maybe they would not like. And I'm not saying that all those people are evil by any means, but I am saying that there are more voices in our community that matter as well. But they have less money. And so because of the public financing, she doesn't have to bite her tongue. She certainly does shoot from the hip, and that gets her in trouble sometimes. She has a quick draw. She's not a standard politician. She's like me. She's a working class person who cares about Portland, sent her kids to Portland public schools, and really wants to make sure that our city is a city that works for everybody, not just the people who are able to influence our elections. And so her platform includes a housing for all policy, and I encourage everybody to look it up. It's at sarah2020.com. But she has a housing for all policy where we really do need to bring both sides of this discussion together to solve the missing middle problem that we have, to make sure that we do build in Portland, which is a heated discussion, but we do need to build. We do need to address the problems with affordable housing, and we need to make sure that when we do build, we do so equitably and that we're not destroying the culture of neighborhoods and pushing people out, and that they are livable places for people to live. And right now we are building, but those places are not livable. Those places are not affordable, and we're not building fast enough. She wants to make sure that people are protected in their homes and don't slip into homelessness. One of the major things that she wants to do is build community safety hubs in every single neighborhood. This will be major for our city, because right now, think of a community center, something like that, but something that's open 24/7, where if I'm driving down the road and I'm like, man, I really have to pee, but there's nowhere to go, I can pull over and go there. I really need a shower, I can go there. Sort of like a community center, like a gym, but that houseless folks can also use these services. And right now we're fighting over where to build shelter because nobody wants it to be just in their neighborhood, because they think that that's going to attract more homeless people into their neighborhood. But if every single neighborhood had autonomy over their own community center and a community safety hub, and every single neighborhood had one, you wouldn't have to worry about it attracting more people, because there would be one in every neighborhood so that people don't have to be displaced. She wants to end the sweeps of the homeless people, because right now we have a situation where if you have connections, if you know the right people to call, you call somebody, and the homeless individuals that are camping outside of your house are swept. But where are they swept? They're swept to some other neighborhood where the person doesn't have the same connections, and those people end up still being homeless. It's not a solution. And not only that, their stuff is taken from them, and now they have less of an opportunity to get out of homelessness. So if we had community safety hubs in every single neighborhood, those people would be able to be clean, they would be able to have showers, there would not be feces in our streets, right? A thing that we see often that people bring up. And people would feel safer in those neighborhoods, and the cultures of those neighborhoods would have input on how those safety hubs work. And also, it helps us prepare for the big one, the big earthquake that's going to occur eventually. We saw how our city and state and country have mishandled the COVID crisis. It did not have to be that way, and it doesn't look great for when this big earthquake is going to hit, when potentially all Portlanders could be displaced. Where are they going to go? So we need safety hubs in every single neighborhood. We need to fight for climate justice. We need to make sure that Portland retains its leadership as a green city, and that it occurs with a just transition where we are not just taking people's jobs away, but we have retraining programs. One of her biggest things is a 30-30-30 plan for Black Portlanders to make sure that we are closing the racial wealth gap. And because if you close the racial wealth gap from Black Portlanders to white Portlanders, it lifts all boats. And so with climate, with a lot of things, we have a climate test of how we're going to test things. She wants to test our economic initiatives by how is it closing the racial wealth gap, not because Black Portlanders are the majority of our city or are much more important than any other Portlander, but because it is a great measure to see how healthy the economics of our city are working. Because if Black Portlanders can't afford to live here, not only are we losing our culture, but all boats are sinking. So if we're able to close that gap, the entire city is going to be doing better. We need to be doing better on COVID relief. Right now, if you're a small business owner, there's no one that you can call in the city. There's no small business hub. So she wants to start a small business office and house it in the mayor's office. Because right now, if you're a small business owner, we are seeing all the time small businesses shuttering due to COVID. That is unacceptable. Everybody at our city should be doing everything they can to make sure that our small businesses are able to stay afloat during this crisis as we wait for a vaccine, God willing, and that we eventually are able to address this crisis. But in the meantime, it is the government's job to keep people safe. And if everybody's small business is closing, nobody is going to be safe in our city. And what we're going to see is at the end, or even now, wealthy corporations, out of town corporations coming in and buying things up. And we're going to lose the culture of our neighborhoods that way once again. I'm trying to think of other policies. I mean, that really sums up the policies, but really one of the major differences between the two candidates that we have here is who they want to talk to, who's going to have a seat at the table. What we hear over and over again, and you echoed something similarly when we started our discussion, Bruce, is that people feel iced out of City Hall right now. People feel iced out of the discussion. We have so much talent in our city. And really, what Sarah says is we have everything we need to solve our most pressing issues. But right now, people feel like their talents and their expertise are not being listened to. And it's hard to say who is being listened to, but it is easy to see that our problems are not being solved. And so that's why I support Sarah. When she called me and said, will you run my campaign? I was in Atlanta making a hell of a lot more money than I am now. And I said, yeah, because Portland is my hometown. I want to make it better. And I feel like there's a problem with the current mayor. I'll tell you one story that made me really decide that I had to do something about Ted Wheeler being in office. I was working with Portland's Resistance, and we were working strongly on, I'm sure you saw it, Bruce, but there was an article a couple years back in the Portland Tribune about unfair policing, where they said crimes like spitting in public, crimes like jaywalking were basically only illegal if you were Black. So victimless crimes like spitting in public were like 10-to-1 arrest rates for Black Portlanders. And so we wanted to meet with the mayor's office and say, let's not police these crimes because they're only being policed against Black people. They don't have victims. And so there's police discretion. Let's not police these. So it's called broken windows policing, which was pushed by Rudy Giuliani, which is a notion that if you really heavily police small, low-level crimes, that will have an impact on larger crimes. And it's proven to not really be effective. I mean, if you lock everybody up, of course, there's going to be a little less crime, but it's disproportionately impacts Black individuals. So we're having these meetings at Portland City Hall about this. And it was clear that myself and the mayor disagreed on a couple things, but they were cordial meetings. The next meeting, the invitation goes out for further discussions, and I was the only Black person in that room, and I was left off the invitation. And we were like, well, maybe is this a mistake? What's going on? So we reach out and they say, no, Greg's no longer invited to these discussions because of his opinions on the mayor. That's unacceptable. To kick out the only Black person in a room that is a discussion about disproportionate policing that impacts Black individuals, and to only invite voices in that agree with you. We've seen it over and over with the mayor's office. If you're not on the dole, if you're not somebody that is receiving city funds that he is in direct control of or has heavy influence of, those are people that are not invited into City Hall. So that's really the biggest difference, is who do you listen to, who has a seat at the table, and who are we talking to solve our most pressing issues?
Okay. Well, Greg, I really appreciate you did that. In fact, that's why I invited you prior to inviting Sarah, because it's good to get down and you get that introduction piece. Therefore, it gives her more time to focus on the things that are of major interest to the public, because time gets short. You know, you'd be surprised how fast this time goes. And so I want to thank you very much. That's one of the reasons why I wanted you to come on. And you did exactly what I thought you were going to do, and that is educate the public from the front end. So when we come up with this second half aspect, she's going to be here next week. The public's going to really be able to get down and ask her the kinds of questions that's on their mind. She's going to be able to reflect on that. So with that, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to come by. And by the way, you can join us, Greg, in this next section if you can stick around, if you don't mind. And those who are looking, call your friends, give them a note, and let them check us out. We'll see you in this next half, okay? We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Oregon Voters Digest. Boy, we're really having a good interview. Greg just got through giving us an update on himself and the fact that we're going to be getting one of the competitors for the mayor's race, and Sarah. And he gave us a good overview. And for those of you who missed it, you may want to go back and get to the first part, if you will, and hit it again, because I tell you, it's going to be very, very important that we pick the right leadership between these two individuals. And it's about the issues, okay? And I noticed there was one piece, and I want to give a little promo on that piece. And then I've done some of the material here, and there was this one particular flyer that I was very excited about. Look at this piece. You check that out. The mayor's place is with the people. Sarah2020.com. Awesome.
That's kind of cute.
That's neat. I like that. But again, we just got through with the interview with Greg, and he did an excellent job. And as I indicated before, you won't see too many media folks putting the campaign manager on before the candidate. It's always just the candidate, and a lot of times they really don't hit those issues that the public is looking forward to be able to comment. So again, I want to thank Greg for actually participating in this situation. And give a little background, because that means a lot to a campaign too. And get a sense of who are the staff, who are the people running this business, because they too have to be sensitive about the issues, and that's a very important piece. And with that, what we're going to do now is that for those of us who watched the show beforehand, if there's any questions that you guys might want to bring up before we get into some other issues, Fred, we'll welcome aboard. We've got Fred Stewart. Fred is on now, and so if anybody's got a couple questions, Dwight, did you want to comment or ask a question of Greg?
I was gonna ask Greg, what was her plan or a proposal to deal with what's going on right now with the protests? You know, what was her angle of how she was thinking of resolving or coming to the table? What was her narrative when it comes to the protests?
Sure. I mean, part of the problem is that the way that we got here was not her doing, and had she been mayor, we would have not been in this situation. But I think that there's a lot of main issues. The first is that we have to have a mayor that unequivocally says that Black Lives Matter, that unequivocally says that police violence is not going to be acceptable. And if you are a racist police officer, or if you are a violent police officer, that you're not going to be policing protests. And that also says that violence from protesters is unacceptable. And so we have a lot of toxic masculinity that's going on both sides of these protests. If you commit a crime, you're out. And that goes for protesters and it goes for police. But we have this, like, we're tiptoeing around the subject where we're tear gassing whole crowds and beating whole crowds because of the actions of certain individuals. Those crimes are already illegal. We don't have to be charging riot for people that are just in the crowds that are peaceful protesters. If somebody commits a crime, you go police that crime. And if somebody is there to protest, you allow them to protest without being beaten by police. And the problem is that both sides are so scared of each other, especially the police are so scared of protesters, as if it's impossible to walk into a crowd and say, you threw a rock at us, you're going to jail tonight. And because they're unwilling to do that, they end up pushing into a crowd and taking whoever they can catch, who is almost most certainly not the person who threw the rock. And we have to say, we have to have leaders that are willing to say that when you set fire to a Multnomah County building, that's not good for our movement. And if you do set a fire to a building, you have to be willing to suffer the legal consequences for that. It's not for me to say whether your anger is righteous or not. Maybe it is. Maybe you deserve to be so angry at the system that you light stuff on fire. But if we just treat people as if that's okay, then our society will break down. And so if you light something on fire, you go to jail that night. And protesters are willing to go to jail. So I'm not trying to, be a cop and be sending people to jail, but protesters are often willing to go to jail. And if you were the protester that lights something on fire, that tells me that you're willing to go to jail that night. If you're a protester that's standing next to that person and you did nothing wrong, you don't deserve to be beaten by police officers. And I just feel like the majority of our city thinks that we want to condemn violence from officers and from protesters, and that we want people to be able to peacefully protest, and we believe that Black Lives Matter. And we have a mayor that is unwilling to unequivocally say Black Lives Matter, who is unwilling to say police violence is a problem, and who is unwilling to condemn the violence at protests. And when you're unwilling to do those things, we have a problem. But also we have to talk about the root causes of why people are protesting. So on day one, we need to meet with the protesters and say, what are your demands? And if those demands are things like, we're going to abolish the police tomorrow, we say, sorry, we're not going to abolish the police tomorrow. That's not going to happen. But if you have a reasonable demand that we can find some common ground on, then let's talk about that and let's get that done. But we're not talking. We're just sitting there yelling at the police, and police are beating up protesters, and we're not moving this conversation forward. And so I like the protests. I think the protests are good, and I think that the protests should be viewed as a tool to move our city forward past police brutality, past bad race relations, rather than as an obstacle to be defeated and overcome. And so that's where I think the difference between the two candidates really lies there.
Hey, Gregory?
Yes, sir.
I agree with everything you said. I'm glad you said everything you said. There's only one thing you said that I disagree with, and I'm pretty strong about it. And I know you don't understand this. The police aren't scared of the protesters. They don't know how to handle them because the mayor hasn't given them instructions on how to handle them other than to stay back.
Okay, Fred.
Now, let me explain something to you. The police are trained to meet force and threat with overwhelming force and threat. So when a protester attacks a cop or intimidates a cop or is violent, the way police officers are trained, the way they are taught to deal with it is to meet that force times 2. So you shoot at a cop twice, they're going to shoot at you 4 times. You spit at a cop, they're going to spit at you twice. That is how they're trained. Now, our mayor is saying don't do that. Our leadership is saying don't meet force with equal force. Find other tools.
So here I think is where lies our disagreement. If somebody spits on an officer, Fred, who is responsible for that?
The officer should arrest that person.
Fred,
the person that spits.
Fred, wait a minute, one at a time.
Yes. Yeah, the person that spits. But the point is, if you go after the person that spits, that is a tactical move. You got to worry about the people next to them, the people who are going to try to keep you from going after that person. And then when that happens, it just doubles down. So, okay, a guy spits on a cop. Cop says, I'm going to arrest you. His best buddy says, leave him alone, and steps inside, steps in that space.
Committed a crime.
Huh?
That person has committed a crime.
Well, no, that's what I'm trying to say. It goes from bad to worse like that. That's what the cops are worried about. They're worried about being supported when they're in that situation. Because I've seen it. I have seen a cop try to arrest somebody and their girlfriend or their best friend or whatever steps in, and now that girlfriend or boyfriend who thinks they're helping the situation, they have now made it worse.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, during the civil rights movement, that very action, Martin Luther King told the civil rights marchers to not do. In other words, they say, if a cop comes to arrest you, let them do it. They specifically told the other bystanders to not get involved. But that's not what happens in downtown Portland. If a cop approaches somebody, Gregory, I ain't saying it's all the time, but a lot of the time, their friends or family or a stranger who hates the cop steps in, and that person now is now committing a crime. So now the cop has 2 people they got to deal with, and then that can become 4 people. Next thing you know, it's 8 people. Next thing you know, you got a riot.
Okay, we got that point. Greg, you want one last point? Then I'll get to Jack. What was the other point about?
Well, no, that's the being scared that I'm talking about, is that you're scared that if you police a crime, that you will have violence put upon you. In fact, this happened to me. I got arrested at a protest, and my wife grabbed onto me, which was not helpful in the situation, and then they arrested her. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think does happen. Clearly, you say you've seen that. I think I've seen that too. I just think that the police have enough tools. We pay them to do this, that if they go in and arrest somebody, sure, there might be some amount of individuals who then retaliate. Those people also will then be arrested. We have enough officers, they have enough gear, they have enough handcuffs to arrest the people who commit crimes, and the people who are not committing crimes should be allowed to peacefully protest.
Gregory, you're right in every respect but one. They're not trained to be it's not that they shouldn't be. This is the issue. Part of what you're saying is touching on how I think society wants cops to be, which is systematically different than what we've wanted in the past. You understand? So in other words, if you're a police officer, you're trained to take that threat, take it down hard. You understand? You're not trained to be a nice person about it. Get my meaning? You're trained to meet threat with threat. So, you're saying, okay, they got a lot of tools to arrest. Well, yeah, they got a lot of tools to arrest, but those tools, they're not meant to make friends. They've decided you're going to be arrested. You resist in any manner. They're trained to defeat that resistance in any manner. Now, that's where I think people like you and Sarah and others, if you get elected, that's where you come in. That's the change that needs to be made.
Okay, I'm
almost done, Bruce.
Wait a minute. You spent a lot of time on this stuff.
All right.
Jack in, and then you can deal with Jack a little bit. Got me. Go on, Jack. Let's go.
It's a pleasure to speak with you on Zoom today. I actually looked up and saw you on TED Talks and enjoyed that presentation you gave on the act of protest. The thing you pointed out the very first, I agree completely. If you're going to bring positive change, it's essential that the leaders, including not just the mayor, but the entire city council, meet with the group and start that dialogue. And one of the first questions I've found, and I've dealt with groups around the world in some pretty hostile situations, is you start by asking the question, what does success look like to you? Help me understand what the issues are. I suspect some of the issues that we're feeling, the protests, are people are just tired of feeling what they feel are the issues being swept under the carpet and just being stomped on and covered up and ignored for a long period of time. Unfortunately, Ted Wheeler has said he supports a lot of things, although Black Lives Matter is not one of them. But he said in his last election, he was an advocate for green energy. But unfortunately, he has either no experience or doesn't understand how really to make the changes to take positive climate action or positive response for our city. A fun fact for you, in the 1960s and 1970s, Oregon generated 99% of our power from renewable energy. Today, about 70%. And we've pushed, yes, our population's gotten larger, but we really have lost the lead as being a climate leader in the United States. There are other states, Republican and Democrat, that have done far more over the last 15 years than our state has. And that could actually make a positive impact if we had a mayor that was really pro-green. So I'm glad to hear Sarah supports that. Bruce, I'll let you take us through the next point.
Okay, sounds good. Well, Fred, what do you think? What about the other issue? There's another issue that's on the table aspect of it, with reference to the race between Dan Ryan and Loretta Smith. I guess now Loretta is challenging the outcome of the election, and she's
That's regrettable. I don't think Loretta should challenge it. If things didn't come out right, I mean, she should have. It shouldn't have been as close as it was. She can run again in 2022. She should go ahead and let the business of the people of Portland move forward. But hey, Bruce, I want to finish that thought that I had with Gregory, because it was something I don't hear Sarah say enough.
Okay.
Like I said, Gregory, one of the biggest arguments for Sarah to be mayor, one of the biggest arguments to not vote for anybody who's been around, is I don't think some of the changes with law enforcement that I think you feel and a lot of people in Portland feel can be made with the same old, same old. You have to understand that. I think a lot of people have bought into something that they're used to. And we're going into a period of time that's very much like Portland was in 1890 when we decided we needed a police force. You get my meaning? It's almost like a do-over period. We got to different a lot of things. And the people that we've got in place and the Portland police, they're not equipped, I think, to handle the new world right now. And that was kind of intentional. So I think one of the biggest arguments for your campaign, for Sarah, and for anybody who's running, including Dan Ryan and Joanne, has been to make this change in this area, okay? Because it does need to be a change. But don't make a mistake at all and think for a second that cops are afraid of anybody. They had their way. They would have bazookas, flamethrowers, and God knows what else. You know what I'm talking about? They're holding back right now because they're told to. And that's why a lot of them are leaving. We're going to have about 200 fewer police officers March 1st, 2021 than we've got today. About 200 fewer in Portland, Oregon. So anyway, going back to what you said about Loretta, Bruce, like I said, it's very regrettable about Loretta making any type of noise about a recount or malfeasance. I think Dan won fair and square. If she wants another bite at the apple, it's not uncommon for a city commissioner to have to run 3 times to get on council. So my advice to her would be to go and make some money for the next 2 years, and then in 2022 run again.
Okay. All right. Dwight, why don't you maybe share a few thoughts, because I know you're very familiar with the folks on the streets, and especially the young folks and whatever, and the relationships with police and whatever. And I know you've basically been encountering with police and trying to basically bring that faction together and have them understand the transparency of what they're dealing with. Any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, truly, I just believe that it is time for us to get to the point of being able to sit at the table and find out what does the redress look like. What are they actually talking about? Because our community is concerned with, are we just going to go through this motion and then be back in the same exact position again and do the same things that we always do? We do the big hurrah, or we have the big protests, or we have the big movements at those times, and then after that's over, we just go back to business as usual. And a lot of the community in the streets are really concerned with, well, what is the outcome of this? Because, they've seen their city tore up. They go downtown. Downtown's not downtown. So, really, truly, they're trying to figure out what's going on and who's in charge, who's running things. Somebody got to step up. Somebody got to be accountable. And it seems like everybody's putting their hands up saying, well, we ain't got nothing to do with it. And then they say Trump, and that ended right there. Mm-hmm. So nobody got to answer when she say Trump. I think they should answer us and answer the community and answer the people to tell us, what's going on? What do you guys, who's the leader? Who's the person who's going to pull this together? Who's going to the table with Black Lives Matter? Who are the people you're sending to the table? Who's going to be there? And what are you guys going to do when we all get them there? So that's my thought, is there's a lot to be put into it, and I'm hoping that they get it together here quickly, because this has went way too far.
One thing I'd like to throw in the conversation you and Greg just talked about with reference to the police aspect of it. Now we got a new DA in town, so to speak. And the DA said, okay, fine, you can pick them all up, but I'm going to vet them out. And I think that Greg was bringing that point up about from the standpoint, the ones who did wrong, they would be, he would be set one side, and the ones who didn't, there was another situation. And probably, now there's that individual who's just there, just observing, just sort of like getting in there, and all of a sudden they get pulled in the deal. I noticed on the news the other day that one particular cop was pretty aggressive. He was beating up on this young woman's head, if you will, and then he threw her down. And so what they did was, so what the DA basically said, I saw them for the first time, so to speak, they pulled him out of that situation. And now he's up for observation. They're looking at his situation. I think that's a good deal. And the reason why I'm bringing that up, Fred, is that they signed a contract. They've gone through training. And they specifically should know exactly what they need to do. They can't carry a bazooka in the shop. If that was the case, then the public should.
Bruce, I'm not saying they would carry a bazooka, but I've been through the Portland police training. Bruce, I've been through their training. I've been through it 3 times over the last 20 years.
Let me make your point.
And they're trained to be aggressive.
Fred, you've been through the training. But
yeah.
The people haven't. The young folks haven't.
I know.
See my point? They got to get that information out to the public a little bit more. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, Bruce. But what I'm trying to say is,
okay.
I think you're missing my point. I'm not necessarily saying that they're reacting the way they should. I think values in our town have changed and how we want police officers to engage us. What I'm trying to say is that hasn't made it to the police. You can't tell somebody who's been taught to break heads and jaws, okay, to not do that. You got to retrain them. You got to bring more values in. You got to have leadership that defines where we're going and how we're going to do it, and start making the changes. I mean, including in letting the people go that just can't conform. But right now, where we're at a stalemate. We got a bunch of cops who are just biding their time till their retirement is up February 1st or January 1st. 200 of the cops that we've got right now with badges in Portland, Oregon, will not be cops March 1st. It is going to change the way we live in Portland, Oregon, aggressively. And we're going to need people who have a very good grasp of vision, okay? Because we need these people who are going to recruit the next group. And they're going to indoctrinate this next group on, hopefully, a new way of law enforcement in this town. I'm not talking about getting rid of the police. I'm talking about the police being different than they are today. It's a great opportunity, but it's also a scary opportunity right now. But right now, with the guys you see on the street at these protests, they're being held back because they don't want to lose their retirement. You understand what I'm talking about? But if they had their way, there'd be blood in the streets.
Okay, Gregory, I want you to talk a little bit about that, because in all due respect, you guys are going to be representing the people if you're sitting in that particular chair. I thought the contract was the thing that's pretty well supposed to handle that, dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and the public knew specifically what they would have to do, what kind of training they'd have to be done, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then i.e. those elected officials would educate the public across the board.
The elected officials we got don't know what to do.
No, but I'm just saying, I'm just asking Gregory, give us, I want you to share some thoughts with you, Gregory. What do you think?
Yeah, I think for one, Fred, I wasn't saying that I think that officers are scared that they're going to like die when they go and arrest somebody. What I'm saying is that they are scared that if they go and arrest somebody who's in criminal activity, that they will be swarmed by other people. And I don't think that that's true. And I think that if it was true, I think they could still deal with the people that are swarming them. But I think the root cause with a lot of what we have in Portland, the problem that we have is that we're asking police to do too much. We're asking police to do things that they're not trained to do. We're asking police to be therapists. We're asking them to be mental health providers. We're asking them to get kittens out of trees. We're asking them to do every single one of our social ills. I mean, we see this as Black men, and we often see, you know, it's a joke when I'm going and canvassing in people's neighborhoods, like, oh, hopefully somebody doesn't call the cops on me. We're calling the cops too much, for one.
Exactly.
We saw in 2018 that 52% of the arrests were of homeless individuals. How about if we spent the same budget instead on addressing homelessness, and then those 52% of arrests wouldn't have to happen because we wouldn't have all these homeless people in our streets. And so we're asking them to clean up our streets of homeless people, which is not their job. That is city council's job to address our housing crisis. We're asking them to be mental health providers. It's not their jobs. And so anybody in our city should agree that when you call for a first responder, that an expert should come. If there is a fire in your house and you call 911, you're not asking for a cop to come, you're asking for somebody who knows how to deal with fires. And so if there is somebody with a mental health crisis in front of me and I call 911, it doesn't have to be a person with a gun. It has to be someone that knows and is trained in dealing in mental health services. And these officers, like Fred said, are not trained in de-escalation the way that Portland expects them to be now. They are trained to go out and hurt people.
And you see, Greg, the problem is we don't have leaders currently on city council. I mean, I'm not putting down Dan. He just got there. And then Joanne, I think Joanne is more this direction, but we don't have leadership in our city that is recognizing what you just pointed out. There is a difference between the people we vote for and the people who are in the community. You understand? There's a way our community is expecting things to be. We want cops to de-escalate, right? That's what I think the community wants, but that's not how the people that are representing us think. That's why they're telling the cops to take any call. That's why they are comfortable with sending a cop that's taught how to body slam people to talk to a homeless person who's having a fit, you know what I'm talking about, instead of sending a professional who knows how to deal with that homeless person. You see what I'm talking about? They're comfortable with that. And if we want change, we got to have people who are examples of that change. You know, they're thinking about the future.
Jack, what do you think?
Well, I think I'm going to disagree a bit with Fred in the sense that actually it was, we did actually have an initiative brought forward. It's going to be started, and that's with a response team, a mental health professional. And I'm saying it's John Hardesty pushed forward that initiative with the fire department as a pilot project. That's a good positive step, but we need other positive steps like that. And I agree completely with Gregory in the sense that we're asking the police to do so much more than most of them are trained to do. So from that standpoint, do we need more people with armored cars and bulletproof vests, or do we need other resources to try and address the broader issues with different skill sets? So we're talking about a whole new transformation of the police force, or shall we say, optimization of the city, a city response force that's very different training and very different skill sets. That the key point is actually when people call to get the right people at the right response, because unfortunately many times the 911 call is very incomplete. And so when whoever shows up, they are found that the situation they think they're addressing or coming to is very different. So that's probably one of the greatest challenges to trying to make these changes happen.
How about changes, Dwight? And then we'll let Fred go on. Both of them.
Yeah. Well, I usually agree with everything that's being said. There's a lot of diversity in our community. I just think we come together, have more conversations like this.
I got you. I hear you.
Get it done.
Well, Fred, you guys, you can see them. The bell's hit right now. But it was an excellent job. A lot of good comments, and I'm sure the viewing audience really appreciated the various comments and whatever. Hopefully, they will join us next week, and I'll have the same team on, and we'll have Sarah here at this point in time, and I'm sure she'll check that out too. Take care and have a good one. I'm sorry about no more.
I don't have much to say. Vote for Sarah in a row. She's at sarah2020.com.
All right, I like that. That's a good close. Take care. Have a good one.